Good evening and welcome to Behind Headlines. And in this program tonight, we'll be discussing the state of our university campuses that have been contaminated with Jew hatred and anti-Israel sentiments, to the fact that we saw massive protests last year, particularly at the University of Columbia. And now we see that President Trump has got involved and sent out an executive order for universities to clamp down on Jew hatred for the protection of Jewish students, but many are arguing that this threatens academic freedom of expression. Regan, it's great that we can be doing another Behind the Headlines, particularly looking at the plight of universities and what we're seeing on university campuses ever since October the 7th has been an explosion of Jew hatred. Our universities have been used to propagate hatred against Israel and the Jewish people, to the extent that Jewish people no longer feel safe on campus, and we hear chants of "We are Hamas" or chants of "Global Intifada." I mean, it's absolutely frightening what's happening in our universities.
Yeah, it very definitely is. This is more of the same, both in the US and in the UK. The chants may vary place to place, but they're essentially going to be geared towards supporting Hamas. I know in local universities near me, there have been routine events advocating for Hamas very openly. There was an event at the London School of Economics recently that was platforming an author, a student function that was calling people to understand Hamas, not as the terror group that they are, and not as the massacring, raping, marauding terrorists that they are, but as some sort of political resistance group of some meaningful legitimacy. Chants of Intifada, revolution, there is only one solution, ringing out and reminding people of multiple tragedies that the Jewish people have faced, going back even to that idea of the final solution, of course, which was advocated by the Third Reich.
It's also very dangerous as well, because we need to look back at history to understand what happened in history in the 1930s. And for the Nazis to gain control over Germany, they needed control of academia. And so therefore what we saw was a kind of radicalization process go through the universities in Germany, where eventually led to Jewish professors being expelled from their positions, Jewish students not able to actually attend German universities. And then it became a hotbed for Nazism. And of course, then what happened is that infected the rest of the population as the Nazis had a stranglehold over the academics. So there's a great danger that if our leading institutions don't get to grips with this Islamofascism that we're dealing now, we're going to have a repeat of world history. But thankfully, Donald Trump, according to the Sunday Times, has issued an executive order where he's launched federal investigations into 60 universities across the United States. He also threatened to withdraw $400 million in federal grants and funding to Columbia, which is part of the Ivy League institution. But we're seeing now he's having a bit of a backlash from academics saying that this is a threat to academic freedom of expression.
Well, and it's interesting that we see this happening on university campuses and in academia. I don't think there's any coincidence with this. Jews are very academic. Historically, we see that there's a higher proportion of Jews who are Nobel Prize winners out of any ethnic group. We have, in terms of population, world population, it's 0.2% of the world population that are Jewish, but 22% of all individual Nobel Prize recipients are Jewish. There is an immense level of academic expertise. And what this seems to me, the whole process that we've seen in the past couple of years on university campuses is a concerted effort to drive Jews and to intimidate Jews out of academia, to make sure that any Jews who are present are in some way strong-armed by Hamas sympathizers into silence, or even to some degree repentance on behalf of the Israeli state. And we're talking about people being singled out, not because they're just Israeli, but because specifically they're identifiably Jewish. So what President Trump has done should have been done, and should have been done 2 years ago by President Biden, in recognizing that there is no place for criminal actions against Jews anywhere, much less on university campuses. What we're talking about here, and we have to be very clear from the off, is not about freedom of speech. It's not about what someone is saying. There is freedom of speech that's enshrined in U.S. Law, and that entails hearing and being able to say things that others might find offensive. But we have had certifiably criminal actions routinely allowed on U.S. campuses, and indeed, I dare say, UK campuses as well.
I echo everything you're saying, but there's also that impact there that that indoctrination with hatred against Israel and the Jewish people is having on Jewish students, who are the future of the nation. They are the ones that will be the future politicians, the future journalists, the future civil servants, the future businessmen and women. And so therefore the Islamists and those who are propagating this ideology of hatred know that. And they know if they capture these young minds, they have them in the future, which means that as a nation, we won't be blessed, according to Genesis chapter 12, 1-3, that I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. But we also know it's important as well to get a biblical perspective on this one. And a scripture, really good scripture comes to mind in this one, in Proverbs chapter 16, verses 16-18, which says, how much better to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding to be chosen rather than silver. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He who keeps his way preserves his soul. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And I think that sums up very much the jihadists and Columbia University. As we know, they're now in freefall.
Well, and this is the reality. When you commit crimes, you need to know that you are risking retribution. You're risking the full weight of justice coming upon you. And this is a situation that it's also individualized, and really the whole element of what's gone on these university campuses is encapsulated in this microcosm sort of situation featuring one Mahmoud Khalil, who was one of the main instigators of violence and criminal activity occurring at Columbia University in the past couple of years.
So let's just remind ourselves of where all this began, particularly after October the 7th. So back on the April of 2022, the Daily Telegraph reported under the following headline: Columbia University cancels in-person classes to quell pro-Palestine campus protests. And Baroness Shafiq moves lectures online as rabbi urges Jewish students to go home and protect themselves. The president of Columbia University in New York moved all classes online on Monday in an attempt to calm students after a weekend of pro-Palestinian protests. Baroness Shafiq, a former Whitehall Mandarin and Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, intervened in a bitter campus row that has left Jewish students fearing for their safety. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators erected dozens of tents at the university last week, demanding that Columbia support a ceasefire in Gaza and disinvest from Israeli funds. Lady Shafiq called in the police to deal with the protest after students were filmed shouting anti-Semitic abuse, and officers made more than 100 arrests.
There was even footage taken, Simon, showing a pro-Palestine demonstrator holding a sign near a Jewish counter-protest that said Al-Qassam's next targets, a reference to the armed wing of Hamas. Now, this isn't about being pro-Palestine even. This is literally being pro-Hamas, pro-Al-Qassam, saying that they're coming after you next, standing right next to the Jewish individuals who were brave enough to counter-protest. Another incident saw Jewish students told to go back to Poland. Chants of pro-Palestine protesters expressing open support for Hamas's terror attack on Israel on October 7th. The announcement also came after Emily Schrader, a rabbi, urged Jewish students to go home and protect themselves from the protesters. This is what Rabbi Schrader said: "It deeply pains me to say that I would strongly recommend you return home as soon as possible and remain home until the reality in and around campus has dramatically improved. It is not our job as Jews to ensure our own safety on campus. No one should have to endure this level of hatred, let alone at school.
And this crisis was so serious that we also saw the intervention then of President Biden in April 2022 make the following statement. He said, alarming surge of anti-Semitism, arguing that silence is complicity. Even in recent days, we've seen harassment and calls for violence against Jews. He said, this blatant anti-Semitism is reprehensible and dangerous and has absolutely no place on college campuses or anywhere else in our country. So it says a day after, this is the Daily Telegraph article, a day after the Hamas attack in which 1,200 people were murdered, a coalition of 24 student groups at Harvard University released a letter blaming Israel for the attack and expressed no sympathy for the victims. In December of 2023, the presidents of Harvard and UPenn and MIT, those of America's top Ivy League universities, were criticized by Congress after refusing to say that genocide had been committed against the Jewish people, which is absolutely unbelievable. So let's have a look now at this CBN News report that dates back to April of 2024 at the height of these protests taking place at Columbia University.
On Columbia's campus, Jewish students endured threats with calls to go back to Poland. Here, a demonstrator points at pro-Israel students while holding a sign that reads, Al-Qassam's next targets. And a Jewish professor is denied entry to the campus while school officials look on.
I am a professor here. I have every right to be everywhere on campus. You cannot let people that support Hamas on campus and me, a professor, not go on campus. Let me in now.
Meanwhile, other Columbia faculty members joined protesters chanting Free Palestine and calling for the school to divest from companies selling weapons to Israel. Demonstrations growing more radical have Jewish students fearing for their safety, leading one rabbi to tell students to stay away because the school can't protect them.
I was there today and it made me sick hearing the things they were saying and doing. So over this holiday, I kind of just want to try to avoid it as best as I can for my own safety.
Monday, the school went to online classes only as New York Governor Kathy Hochul came to see the situation firsthand.
Students are scared. They're afraid to walk on campus. They don't deserve that. I've never seen a level of protest that is so person to person. It is so visceral. And I'm not calling on everyone. People need to find their humanity. Have the conversations. Talk to each other.
Protests, however, spread to other schools in the Northeast. Monday night at NYU, police clashed with protesters while making arrests as they tore down a tent encampment. At Yale, police arrested 45 students for trespassing as their peers celebrated them as heroes. Pro-Palestinian students at MIT have declared part of their campus a liberated zone. While at Harvard, officials shut down Harvard Yard until Friday to prevent similar protests.
The reaction is simply horror.
Rabbi Moshe Hauer told CBN News it needs to be stopped.
It's been happening in one place after the other at different degrees, and if it's not addressed properly and efficiently, it will continue to grow. If they're doing things which break the law, they should have consequences as defined by the law. But they must have consequences. The answer can't be, we spoke to them.
Monday, President Biden condemned the anti-Semitic protests while also condemning those he says don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians. Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, it's truly remarkable that even a Jewish assistant professor there was barred from entering his own university class. It's just remarkable, Simon.
Well, it's like the world has gone upside down, and thankfully we're seeing now that President Trump is bringing some muscle and steel into this situation to actually bring these universities that are out of control into line, because we cannot afford to allow this Jew hatred on campus. Even when I was at a university in the mid-90s, it was pretty bad then for the Jewish community and those associated with Israel. I was very much involved with the JSOC then, the Jewish Union, and they tried to get banned from the Islamic Society because they wanted that as a pretext to take over the union. That was in the 90s. I mean, now the situation is absolutely horrific 30 years on.
Yeah, and this is something that we're seeing playing out. We've been seeing it playing out for a number of years, and it seems to get worse. The Spectator has reported that Gaza student protesters have emboldened America's enemies, and clearly, we're seeing criminal activity taking place on these university campuses, trespassing, violent acts, incitement to violence as well, vandalism, literally holding, in some cases, hostage individuals, keeping people from being able to carry out their day-to-day work as well. Just incredible amounts of disruption. Jason Brodsky, writing for The Spectator on 1st of May of 2024, says, over the past few weeks, protests, referring to those in April that we've been talking about, have rocked college campuses across the United States over Israel's war against Hamas. Last night, police raided Columbia University to remove students occupying one of its buildings, whilst violence has broken out between protesting groups at UCLA in California. These buildings are not public property, Simon. They're private property to be used at the sole discretion of the university and its staff in accordance with its guidance and its rules. So people should not downplay or minimize the criminality of invading a university building, setting up shop, claiming it as your own building. It's like moving into someone's apartment and saying, right, I'm just going to set up a protest against your presence here. That's what's going on. The pro-Palestine demonstrators then portrayed themselves as if they are defenders of human rights and social justice, while infringing on human rights and committing acts against social justice.
And incitement to genocide as well.
Incitement to genocide. Incitement to the eradication of the only democratic free state in the Middle East.
Absolutely. So just a bit of a graphic description warning here, because Jason Brodsky writes something that is very disturbing and really compares the silence, for example, of universities and university campuses to the plight of Iranian women. So he says this one, nor do they seem concerned about the plight of people living under the most repressive governments in the world. Take Iran. A United Nations fact-finding mission this year found cases of women and girls subjected to rape and other forms of sexual agenda-based violence, including gang rape, rape with an object, the electrocution of genital organs, forced nudity, and groping during women's life freedom protests against the Islamic Republic. All the while, the United States continues to pursue diplomatic deals with Tehran and allows it to fund its malign activity with generous sanction waivers and tax enforcement of US sanctions, also lax enforcement of US sanctions. Of course, this was written prior to the Trump administration. Yet there was no widespread campus protests against the Iranian leadership or for changes to US policy, as the people of Iran were being blinded, executed, tortured in the search of freedom. So again, what we're seeing here, aren't we, Regan, is this singling out of the only one and only Jewish state for abuse, to even question Israel's right to exist, and supporting of Hamas. And yet when we see the real atrocities being committed, namely by the Islamic Republic of Iran against their own people, and particularly sexual violence against women, there's silence.
Well, and of course it is the Iranian regime in many cases that's been funding many of these protests. It's so clear. It's only when Israel, and Brodsky goes on to share this, that the world's only Jewish state, when it's defending itself against rapists, murderers, and the sorts of scenes we saw on the 7th of October, that there's this degree of frenzied hysteria across universities. We don't see the same protest for Yazidis. We don't see the same protest in relation to Congo. We don't see, there's no other concern that's going on.
Christian persecution.
It's only when Israel is rightly and justly defending itself. This is the sole victim that would seem is going on in the universities in terms of the concern. It's anti-Israel. It's completely I'm not even going to say pro-Palestinian or pro-Palestine. It's pro-Hamas. It's defending Hamas. And it's arguing that there was in some universe, a rationale that justifies the heinous actions that were committed by its bloodlusting terrorists on that day.
Yep. We also see a report here published by Politico, and this was back on the 27th of May 2024, under the headline, From Colombia to Colombia, the Global Resurgence of Antisemitism. We have the power to stop hate from becoming the new norm. And again, they quote chants at these universities such as "We are Hamas," "Globalize the Intifada," which is a call for genocide against the Jewish people worldwide. And then they also quote that on the 1st of May 2024, students at 3 British universities, the University of Bristol, University of Leeds and Newcastle University, set up tents as part of their protests. And in Paris, students occupied multiple buildings at the prestigious Sciences Po campus, and also at McGill University in Montreal. Anti-Zionist activities were recorded shouting at counter-protests, urging them to go back to Europe, and shouting adoring portraits of Abu Ardaya, the spokesman for Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades. But we also see, didn't we, as well, that during those protests there was a big vote of no confidence in the president of Colombia, in particular her handling of this crisis on campus, how she didn't crack down on this and bring the police in earlier to stop these protests, and incitement to violence, incitement to genocide, and how Jewish people felt unsafe on campus. Why she did not act sooner? I think that's one thing we are going to unpack now.
Back on 8th of May 2024, The Telegraph reported under the headline, Columbia University Department to hold vote of no confidence in president, that Lady Shafiq faced calls to resign over handling a pro-Palestine protest. The Columbia University Department held a vote of no confidence in President Baroness Shafiq after her handling of last month, of course, again, this is over a year ago now, pro-Palestine protests sparking outrage. Lady Shafiq, a British peer, has faced calls to resign after she used police to clear student encampments and remove protesters from Hamilton Hall. The former director of the London School of Economics has also come under fire from both Democrats and Republicans for failing to get the protests under control quickly. The decision to hold the vote shows the depth of anger among professors over last month's arrests of student protesters, with some professors being frustrated by Lady Shafiq's testimony before Congress, during which they believe she bowed to the demands of Republicans on questions of academic freedom. Jewish professor Shai Davidai last week accused, this is going again back to May of 2024, failing to stamp out anti-Semitism at the New York University following the October 7th attack on Israel by the terror group Hamas, claiming that a vacuum of moral leadership had forced Jewish students to abandon their lessons while openly pro-Hamas academics radicalized their peers.
A really disturbing. Also, a disturbing article was followed a few weeks later. So the Daily Telegraph reported on the 9th of August 2024 under the following headline, 3 Columbia University deans resign over exchanging anti-Semitic text messages. Susan Han Kim, Christian Krollman, and Matthew Pasanik have not apologized for their actions. And this is what they said. So essentially, they sent mocking text messages to each other, mocking Jewish people. It says, in text which proved to be a major embarrassment for an institution already grappling with the accusations of anti-Semitism, one dean suggested a Jewish speaker was playing up concerns to raise money. Another dean sent a vomit emojis when a college newspaper opinion piece authorized by a local rabbi was mentioned. Now, what was also very disturbing as well is that the same principal of Columbia University has, back in August of 2024, been recruited by our own Foreign Secretary David Lammy to join him in the Foreign Office.
And the Daily Telegraph has reported this on the 15th of August, 2024. And this, it went past me. I didn't notice this until now, but it was publicized, albeit in a limited way, that the Columbia University boss who quit over the Gaza protests is now working with David Lammy. Manouk Shafiq has taken up job at the Foreign Office after her handling of pro-Palestine activism on campus came under fire. There was nothing to inspire confidence in her handling of this, but apparently it won the attention of our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. The president of Columbia University has resigned to take up a job in the Foreign Office following heavy criticism of her handling of pro-Palestine protest on campus. With Baroness Shafiq, who has made a life peer in the House of Lords in 2020, announced on Wednesday that she will step down immediately, just weeks before the start of the new academic year.
Well, it's quite frightening, really, because obviously she allowed these protests to take place at Columbia University already, so she was either sympathetic to lecturers and students who advocated that worldview. So then to be promoted to the British Foreign Office and to be working alongside David Lammy forming British foreign policy is extremely alarming, and we should all be concerned. Her incompetence in dealing with the protesters, not being able to stamp it down, and then given a high-profile role in the British foreign policy, working on British aid projects, is extremely alarming and also disturbing. But we also have to look back at history as well, because there is a danger that history will repeat itself. So there's a historic publication online called Facing History, and they published an article under the following headline: Controlling Universities, learn how the Nazis pursued their ideology into German universities and how academics like Heidegger and Einstein responded. So it says, Germany's 1933 civil service law applied to university professors as well as elementary and second school teachers. It was not difficult for the Nazis to win the support of many university professors, administrators and students. At the time, a majority of them backed conservative political parties and were hostile to the Weimar Republic. Many university professors immediately welcomed the Nazi-led government in 1933. Many student fraternities and other students groups already banned Jews and regularly protested against professors they believed did not support the supposed traditional German values. Scholars who were Jewish or supported left-leaning parties struggled to find research and teaching positions in public government-supported German universities, and often worked in private ones instead. The passage of the new law, the Nazis attempted to root out any dissent of their policies and ideologies that remained in German higher education.
Peter Drucker, an Austrian economist, was then a lecturer at Frankfurt University, and fearful of Hitler's plans for Germany, was prepared to leave the country, but hoped that it would not be necessary to do so. The first Nazi-led faculty meeting at the university convinced him otherwise. Frankfurt was the first university that the Nazis tackled precisely because it was the most self-confidently liberal of major German universities, with the faculty priding itself on allegiance to scholarship, freedom of conscience, and democracy. The Nazis knew that control of Frankfurt University would mean control of German academia, and so did everyone at the university. And so they wasted no time on amenities, a media announcement that Jews would be forbidden to enter university premises and would be dismissed without salary on March 15th, something that no one had thought possible, despite the Nazis' loud antisemitism. Then he launched into a tirade of abuse, filth, and four-letter words such as had been heard very rarely, even in the barracks, and never really before in academia, pointing his finger at one department chairman after another and saying, "You either do what I tell you or we'll put you into a concentration camp." There was silence when he finished, with everybody waiting for the distinguished biochemist physiologist. The great liberal got up, cleared his throat and said, "Very interesting, Mr. Commissar, and in some respects very illuminating. But one point I didn't get too clearly, will there be more money for research in physiology?" The meeting broke up shortly thereafter, with the commissar assuring the scholars that indeed there would be plenty of money for racially pure science. A few of the professors had courage to walk out with their Jewish colleagues, but most kept a safe distance from those who only a few hours earlier had been their close friends. "I went out sick unto death and knew that I was going to leave Germany within 48 hours.
Well, this is a frightening warning from history, because it shows you the article how the Nazis took hold of the academic institutions in Germany. And today we're seeing a similar ideology in Islamofascism taking control of our universities. And it was intimidation, fear and violence used in order to actually do that. This is obviously not coming from governments, but certainly coming from grassroots and Middle Eastern states who are pushing this agenda.
Very definitely. As the Sunday Times has reported recently, on the 23rd of March, under the following headline, "Universities quake as Columbia caves to Trump's $400 million threat over anti-Semitism." At his inauguration, President Trump promised to bring back free speech. Now academics are accusing him of the opposite. At 60 universities being under federal investigation for alleged anti-Semitism, and more than 50 facing claims of racial discrimination that disadvantage white and Asian students. Last week, the White House paused $175 million US, or 135 million pounds, in federal funding to the University of Pennsylvania, citing policies on transgender sport. But the biggest precedent has been set in a standoff with Columbia University. The liberal Ivy League in New York became the epicenter, as has been put by the Telegraph, of pro-Palestinian student protests last year. On 7th of March, the Trump administration canceled $400 million of federal grants and contracts to the university because of what it described as a failure to protect Jewish students and staff from anti-Semitic harassment and violence.
Also, the Sunday Times also, in their article, also announced that the US government outlined 9 demands before funding could be reinstated: banning of masks, enabling a campus police to arrest students, appointing an academic overseer in the Department of the Middle East, as well as the Department for Palestine Studies. But critics have warned that this is a threat to academic freedom of expression. So let's go to this CBN News report now, addressing this issue of how President Trump is now getting tough with universities that are not confronting Jew hatred on campus.
As a grad student, Mahmoud Khalil is in the country on a green card. Last year, though, he helped lead pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia, actions the Trump administration believes to be aligned with Hamas, a designated terror organization.
Our main demand, which is divestment from the Israeli occupation, there's an impasse in that.
Khalil became one of the most visible campus activists last year, acting as a negotiator for students who erected a tent encampment on Columbia's campus. Now his lawyer says he's being held at a Louisiana detention facility due to President Trump's executive orders prohibiting anti-Semitism.
They've invoked this broad, vague immigration authority that in theory allows, with due process, the removal of someone based on a certification of the Secretary of State that they're compromising national security interests. This is a preposterous and dangerous extension of that authority, and it's basically meant to remove spies, not individuals engaged in human rights activism.
Mahmoud Khalil was an individual who was given the privilege of coming to this country to study at one of our nation's finest universities and colleges. And he took advantage of that opportunity, of that privilege, by siding with terrorists.
A federal judge has temporarily blocked Khalil's deportation while the case plays out in court.
His speech is absolutely protected by the Constitution, and it should be chilling to everyone that the United States government could punish or try to deport someone because they disapprove of the speech they're engaged in.
Still, Trump says more arrests are coming, writing on Truth Social, quote, "If you support terrorism, including the slaughtering of innocent men, women, and children, your presence is contrary to our national and foreign policy interests, and you are not welcome here."
This is an individual who organized group protests that not only disrupted college campus classes and harassed Jewish American students and made them feel unsafe on their own college campus, but also distributed pro-Hamas propaganda, flyers with the logo of Hamas.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio writing on X, quote, "We will be revoking the visas and/or green cards of Hamas supporters in America so they can be deported." Mark Caleb Smith, the director of the Center for Political Studies at Cedarville University, tells CBN News this case brings up the larger question of how much authority we want to put in the hands of the executive branch.
I understand at some level we might be sitting here thinking, of course we're against someone who espouses support for an organization that we generally do see as terrorists, but think through what this would mean for another president from another party or with a different ideology who might have a different approach in defining what terrorism or terrorist activity really is. And so broadening that amount of power could lead to some really severe abuse.
A hearing for Khalil is scheduled for later today, and his attorney has requested he be returned to New York while the case plays out. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
And in this week's Behind Headlines, we're joined by Emily Schrader, also known as AK Emily Tel Aviv, joining us from Tel Aviv. Emily, it's an absolute pleasure that you can join us on Behind Headlines today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
And Emily, could you just explain to us why the University of Columbia has become the epicenter of Jew hatred, with so many anti-Israel protests that even Jewish students are afraid to attend Columbia University?
Well, it's interesting because I actually wouldn't say that it's the epicenter of the anti-Israel protests. We see this happening on a lot of campuses. That's why the American Department of Justice actually just opened an investigation into not one, not two, not three, but 10 different universities, including the one where I received my bachelor's degree and also, of course, experienced anti-Semitism way back when I was in university. And of course, the situation is significantly worse today. And since October 7th, we've seen a massive increase in anti-Semitism and harassment, even in targeted attacks, violent physical attacks against Jewish students and allies across campuses. Now, Columbia was, of course, one of the worst universities since October 7th. We saw the illegal encampments. We saw student groups take over buildings more than once. In one case, they actually held two different members of the janitorial staff hostage inside of the takeover for some period of time before ultimately allowing them to be released. There were injuries as well from this takeover. So we're talking about really, really extreme behavior. This is not about freedom of speech or holding up a sign that's offensive to someone. It's much, much deeper than that. And I think that the American administration is right to be dealing with this with, frankly, an iron fist. And I hope that they're able to shut down this movement that is really a pro-terrorism movement. It is not pro-Palestinian.
Emily, thank you for that. Now, you've recently published a book, 10 Things Every Jew Should Know Before They Go to College, and this seeks to address common misconceptions and falsehoods about Jews and Israel. I've seen, in relation to some of these student protests, is how they're being billed, the claim and a misconception, particularly in relation to one individual, Mahmoud Khalil. This is a quote from a Christian leader in the United Kingdom. This man has, as far as we know, committed no crime of any kind. He was a legal resident and has an American wife, 8 months pregnant. Would you say that this is an accurate summary of Mahmoud Khalil? How would you respond to such a claim?
Absolutely not. I think it's very clear that he has been one of the leaders of the CUAD divestment group at Columbia University. He was the negotiator between the university and the, frankly, for lack of a better term, domestic terrorists on campus when they took over illegally a building. He has also allegedly passed out Hamas media office materials, which could be argued in a court of law as being material support for a terrorist organization. And beyond all of this issue, he is not an American citizen. He's a green card holder. He is not an American citizen. Those are interpreted differently under the law. And of course, when he obtained his green card, he signed on that document that he would not be supporting terrorist organizations. Hamas is a U.S. designated foreign terrorist organization, and he has been supporting them on campus, not to mention the fact that the byproduct of his activities led to explicit racist and discriminatory behavior against a protected minority group on that campus alone. Now, beyond that, he also has violated the terms of his green card in that he didn't disclose his affiliation with UNRWA, which is a UN agency that has been shown repeatedly now to be colluding with Hamas on the ground in Gaza. So there are a number of different legal issues in terms of Mahmoud Khalil's behavior, and that's important. This is not about his expression, his opinion. Even if he said, I support Hamas, you could argue that that would be free speech. We're not talking about speech. We're talking about his actions. We're talking about what he actually did on campus and what the result of it was. And yes, there is a massive problem with that, and the United States is well within their rights under the Department of State to deport him and revoke that green card.
And Emily, are we seeing echoes of history here with the rise of anti-Israel sentiment and also Jew hatred on campus, and comparing that to what we saw in Germany in the 1930s when the Nazis took over the academic institutions there and pushed their Nazi propaganda? Is there not a danger here that in the sense that of defending academic freedom of expression, all we are doing is encouraging fascism, extremism and Islamism?
Well, I mean, I think that this can really cut both ways. Yes, we need to crack down on the radicalism on campus, but on the same time, at the same time, we want to protect civil liberties for all of the students, whether that be, at Columbia University or where I studied. This is an important value in the United States and in all of the West, in the United Kingdom too. So we do want to protect academic freedom and make people able to have difficult conversations, even if they disagree. What's happened in the United States right now and on the campuses, and frankly, from my experience lecturing in UK universities as well, it's even worse, is that there is one side which wants to shut down the free speech of others, and that is the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas movement that is consistently trying to shut down the pro-Israel movement, the Jewish students, and frankly, any opinion that they disagree with. They believe that they are entitled to silence others. And I think nowhere is that more prominent than what we saw actually at Oxford University several months ago when the Oxford Union held a debate on Israel. I was not one of the debaters, but I was present in the debate. I think I was one of 6 pro-Israel students. Everyone else there was a radical Islamist. And some of the footage that we saw coming from this event is just simply horrifying. The entitlement that some of these students have is very much similar to what we're seeing on campuses as part of these divestment and encampments, which, by the way, are illegal across American universities. And we need to be honest about that, and we need to have a zero tolerance approach towards those who are really making every effort to silence those whose opinions they disagree with.
Emily, what is one thing that you would like for us to know and that you would like our viewers to know about Jews going to college and the situation that's being faced, not only in the US, but in the UK?
Well, I think it's important that people understand the level of threat that Jewish students are facing and the level of harassment that they're facing. I think that in the UK and the US both, it's completely unreasonable to expect, a random Jewish student who, in most cases, isn't studying politics or anything even related to a conflict occurring in the Middle East. Usually they are not citizens of the state of Israel. And so to expect them to have the equivalent of a law degree in, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is completely unreasonable. And the same way that you would never turn to a Muslim student simply because they're Muslim and say, well, how do you explain the fact that such and such is occurring in a random Muslim country? No one should be doing that with the state of Israel either. There is a conflation that's being made and it is inaccurate. And I think that we need those who are Jewish to feel comfortable standing up and saying that this is a form of discrimination. But we also need allies. We need Christian allies. We need Muslim allies, Hindu. Those who stand with the Jewish people need to be standing up as well and speaking out against this discrimination that's taking place. And by the way, the university is just one aspect of it. Unfortunately, we see that there is a tolerance of intolerance against primarily today the Jewish community, but it doesn't it doesn't end there. It only starts there. What starts with the Jews never really ends there. And so it's important that all of us are able to see what's happening for what it really is, and more importantly, to call it out.
And finally, do you think that Donald Trump's executive order in which he actually threatened Columbia University with withdrawing over $400 million in grants and aid to Columbia University and other universities will have an impact on campuses actually cracking down on Jew hatred so that Jewish students can feel protected and have that freedom of academic expression where they are free to be Jewish, free to express their opinions and their beliefs in the modern state of Israel without that fear of attack or intimidation?
I think that what Donald Trump has done with the freezing of grant money to Columbia University in terms of contracts and partnerships, this is critical. It should have been done a long time ago. This is not a partisan issue. This is something that should be done across the board with all of these universities that refuse and have refused for many years now to crack down on the radicalism on their campuses. This absolutely needs to happen. It should happen at other universities as well. I hope we've already seen Columbia backtrack a little bit, the administration, and implement some of the demands of the Trump administration, but it needs to happen across the board. And we also need to see a crackdown on these protesters beyond just the university. We know that Columbia refused to suspend a lot of these or expel a lot of these protesters, despite the fact that they blatantly broke the laws and that they violated the rights of other students. But it needs to go beyond the university. It needs to be enforced under the law as well, because that's the only way, at the end of the day, the only way to protect civil liberties and to ensure that we have the maximum amount of academic freedom is when we enforce the law when it comes to greater issues such as physical security, national security. These are things that need to be enforced 100% so that we can have difficult conversations on our campuses and in our communities.
So Emily, we want to thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Headlines. You've done a great job. Please keep up the great work that you're doing in being a wonderful spokeswoman for Israel and the Jewish people at this critical moment in world history.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very thankful to Emily Schrader there, and please do find a copy of her latest book. I'm sure you'll find it beneficial, as well as follow her on social media. Always very, very helpful insights. Now, Simon, you have been a long-term commentator on this issue of Jew hatred. It's been a matter of passionate advocacy on behalf of our Jewish family and friends. And you have produced some time ago now a program, a decade ago, a program that's ever relevant on Jew hatred, warning from history. Here's some insights from that program 10 years ago.
Are there students who no longer want to go to university because of the experience of anti-Semitism that they've actually faced?
Yes, the students speak, so they speak to their parents, they speak to their little brothers, little sisters, and so we observe a phenomenon that the young students are leaving before their studies. They're leaving to England, to Canada, to United States, and also to Israel. We have less and less students, Jewish students in Belgium today.
What would you like to see take place in order to protect Jewish students at university, but also to ensure that Jewish students don't face any anti-Semitism or discrimination?
A lot of persons don't understand the anti-Semitism 3.0 because they don't use the term Jew. They use another term, Zionist. And for certain persons, it's a political opinion. And we have to show that it's not a political opinion. Alone, we cannot success. We have to find the support of the other citizen to succeed.
We have arranged to meet Julian, who is a university student, who can tell us at first hand the experience he's faced of anti-Semitism. Julian, can you explain to us how, as a Jewish student, that you've personally experienced anti-Semitism?
One day, people come to me and play with a lighter on my jacket to make it burn, because I was Jewish, and they say something like, "Go burn with your ancestors in a oven. Go back, go die, because you're Jewish." And I went to the director of the school. I asked him what to do, and he asked to the student who say this word, and asked him to apologize to me. And the student said, "I'm really sorry that you are offended of something normal." For him, it was normal to try to burn me and to say that. And the director said, "Okay, do you accept these apologies?" And I said, "No, this is not not apologies. It's something worse for me." He said, "Okay, I can do anything. He's free to go."
How can we ensure that students like yourself don't experience anti-Semitism at universities and schools?
In university, I don't really know. Maybe teach to the teacher what the reality is. Maybe if the teacher knows what the reality is, they can teach to the student what it is.
On the 24th of May 2014, Mehdi Mamouche, a 29-year-old French national from Algerian origin, entered the Jewish Museum in downtown Brussels with a handgun and a Kalashnikov rifle. He opened fire on Jewish civilians, killing 3 and critically wounding a 4th, who later died in hospital. The attacker had not long returned from Syria after fighting for the Islamic State. It is believed that his radical Islamic beliefs led him to single out a Jewish target. Behind me is the Jewish Museum that was attacked on the 24th of May 2014, which killed 4 Jewish people. I regularly come to Brussels once a month, and the one thing I've noticed after the Paris attack is that we see paratroopers guarding Jewish places of interest. And as you can see behind me, there are 2 Belgian paratroopers who are protecting this Jewish museum. And sadly, all I can say is that this is a sad reflection of Belgian society. The fact that the imminent threat of the Islamic State and Islamic fundamentalists is so real that we're now seeing Belgian paratroopers with machine guns protecting a Jewish museum. Who could have thought this could have happened, particularly now?
That was from Simon's documentary, Jew Hatred, A Warning from History, Part 2, and you can find all 3 parts of that very helpful documentary on demand and on YouTube. Thank you for those insights, Simon.
No, it's a pleasure, and that was 10 years ago. And this was how the Jewish community were feeling after the ISIS attacks in Paris, the Charlie Hebdo attack, the attack on the Jewish kosher supermarket in Paris, and also the ISIS attack at the Jewish Museum in Brussels back in 2014, and having the opportunity then to interview Jewish students on campus at one of the prestigious universities in Belgium, and how they were concerned back then. But of course, what's happened post October the 7th is that this has just gone out of control, in which Jewish students are fearful, they are scared, in many cases feeling intimidated, and the situation now, 10 years on from this, is 100 times worse. But this is when the principals of the universities should have got their act together and actually dealt with this then. But we're thankful now that President Trump is showing tough action and an iron fist to this problem, because he has to, and we have to root out Jew hatred on university campuses.
Absolutely, and I think it's important, Simon, that we recognize, because some people, there's this element where just because this has been enacted by President Trump, there's skepticism over it, which is complete nonsense. Every president is going to make good calls and bad calls. This call should have been made by Joe Biden when he condemned the protest, albeit slightly indirectly, when they were beginning to kick off. But the Daily Telegraph has a particular opinion piece under the headline, Columbia University deserved it. And it spoke of the millions in federal grants removed for failing to stop anti-Semitism. Good, they say, now other institutions face the same fate. And they outlined some of what we've been talking about particularly, but under applicable U.S. federal law, namely Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, universities that do not provide adequate civil rights protections are at risk of losing federal funds, theoretically, in their entirety. And so this is the threat that Columbia has faced, as they have inadequately protected Jewish students since the 7th of October, even allowing groups to invade and occupy whole faculty buildings, calling for the destruction of Israel, the death of Jews, praise for Hamas and terrorism in general. This is illegal, spreading propaganda, Hamas branded propaganda, terror groups' propaganda on campus. There's video footage and evidences of that that viewers can find and research yourself on. But the Trump administration then also arrested and initiated legal proceedings to deport Mahmoud Khalil, a Syrian national who, as a Columbia student, led on-campus pro-Hamas protest. And it said this is the first arrest of many to come. There have been some who have alleged, including the Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, that Columbia refused to cooperate with other Department of Homeland Security inquiries into its student body, and stated that the president is not going to tolerate that.
I'm pleased as well. Finally, we're seeing some action by President Trump on clamping down on Jew hatred on campus. It's about time. And the best way to do that is to threaten the withdrawal of millions of pounds worth of grants to these academic institutions. This is not a threat to academic freedom of expression, because clearly what we're seeing, by empowering the Islamists, by empowering the hard left, preventing Jewish people from able to go to university and study at university, this is the great danger to academic freedom of expression, and this is what needs to be confronted.
Well, there are 60 American institutions of higher education, including Johns Hopkins, are now under Justice Department investigation for failing to prevent campus discrimination, which is, of course, illegal. And we see that Columbia's interim president has seen the light to some degree, calling the administration of President Trump as having legitimate concerns. And so there seems to be some greater, now that money is involved, some greater cooperation going on. But if our universities become breeding grounds for Jew hatred and anti-Israel protest, this is dangerous and is a threat to our society, as academia is essential for healthy democracy.
Absolutely, and also we have to remind ourselves that the students at our universities will go on and become our political leaders. They will go on to become our business leaders and our journalists. And that is a great danger, because if they're indoctrinated with this Islamist-fascist ideology, this can only mean bad news for our society and our nation. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.